All right, Ben, how about it?
99 sandwiches of Zen on the wall. Take one down, pass it around. What do you get? We get 100, I think. Somehow
Yeah.
you get more. So I'm supposed to ask you some questions about what you've learned over your journey. I've definitely recorded 100 episodes, but I've only released 78 because you're better at keeping at schedule than I am. So props to that. Good job with keeping regular.
Thanks.
I did. Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I have had to take a couple of sabbaticals where I had to take 2 weeks off. I don't want to say burned out, but I got busy with the other business, the washi business, and just so much other stuff that I would like to stay consistent, like one each week, but there have been a couple of times where I've had to take an extra week off.
Yeah, unplanned sabbaticals are,
Yeah.
sometimes necessary. But so my first question, because I'm the failure guy, I tend to mess things up more than I don't, and that's until I figure out how to not mess it up. What through 100 plus episodes, because I've imagined you recorded more than that.
Yes.
What have you learned in terms of being an interviewer? I also interview people, so my main content comes from the mouths of other folks. So, as a podcast interviewer, would you say
Hmm.
there are things that you've gained in terms of
Yeah.
insight as to learning, listening, making sure you like pay attention to the interesting things in order to ask follow-up questions? I don't know what your process is there, but like what have you learned from interviewing so much?
Well, you almost answered the question within your question because yeah, I would say that I've gotten better at actually listening to the answers. I've always scripted out my questions. I don't just shoot the shit with somebody generally, and
During an episode, so you're saying you write every question?
yeah, I do before. I do more. It
Okay.
takes me longer to prepare for the interview than it does to do the interview. I might do 2 or 3 hours of preparation to do a 30-minute interview.
I
And
might do 2 to 3 hours of editing on a thing that I like popped into 5 minutes before and didn't know the name of the person who I was interviewing. That's how little I do on the front end because I like to keep it wishy-washy,
yeah.
pun intended, uh,
Well,
throughout the episode. So I don't plan any of my questions at all. So it's interesting to hear that you plan them all out.
I do, and and then I do another 2 or 3 hours of editing. It's 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 hours to do a 30-minute episode. People don't realize that.
Plus promotion.
Oh, that yeah, that's not even counting the promo stuff. But anyway, to get back to your question, I've gotten better at listening and then being able to adjust my questioning on the fly. Whereas, like, if you go back and listen to my first few episodes, my first few interviews, um, I'm sort of sticking to my script. And so somebody will answer a question, and without me, really focusing on what they said and asking a follow up, that later on when I listened to the episode, I'm like, oh man, I should have asked this. I just went straight to my next scripted question. But now I'm a lot more flexible. So if somebody says something interesting, I can keep going down that rabbit hole, and I might not even get to all my questions. So I'd say I'm a better listener now.
That's good. And a better question asker because
I think so.
I had a similar experience what you just said. I was interviewed on a podcast, and 2 weeks later, Grant Cardone was on the same podcast. I was like, wow, that's amazing. And he asked all the same exact questions. And every time you'd say something, you'd be like, oh, gotcha. You're like, yeah, I understand. And then move on to his next question. So the ability to keep up rapport and like continue along the way of like
Yeah.
something that you found out, a nugget of info that you found out, it's
I, I
important.
I will tell you too. I mean, here we're kind of free flowing right here. Um, Something I've gotten much much better about, and that's when I do my research for someone I'm going to interview. If they've been on other podcasts, I'll go listen to those podcasts,
Mhm.
and if that person, and I'm not going to name anybody in particular, but there's been a couple of people I've interviewed. If that person has these sort of canned responses, so in other words, they're giving the same identical answer on every podcast they go on, I I cut them. I beat them to the punch. So what I do is because I've researched and I've listened to those podcasts, I will actually regurgitate their answer so that they can't say that answer.
Like phrase the question with that answer baked
With
into
that
it, kind
answer,
of.
I'm like, you said on another podcast, blah blah blah. So my question is, and I'm extending I'll go ahead and get their nonsense canned response out of the way within my question, so that it forces them to think and go beyond that.
I've done the same thing. The few times I do my research and I listen to other podcasts, when I hear, like you're saying, when they're going over the same stories, the same hit points, you want to get something fresh out of them because you
Yes,
know that, it's been said before,
right.
but even if it's that your audience's first time hearing this person, I want to always get something that hasn't been said
Me
by
too.
them
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
why wouldn't you want to know more than the average bear? We're
Right.
gonna call it. So my last question to you,
Mm.
this one was not planned, but I want to know if you could have done something differently in terms of the format of the show, the way you started it, the way you run it, the way any piece of it. Like, is
Mhm.
there a part that if you could go back, because like even me, I I happen to say the same first and last two questions in every episode from the first one on, and I'm happy that I like didn't have to come up with a bunch of things along the way. If you
Yeah.
can go back and
Well,
reset or redo anything in a different way, the format wise, what would
the
you?
yeah, I would say that the show has evolved. I mean, which is to be expected. And um, in a like now, well, let's put it this way: when I started out, it was a matter of, okay, I'm going to hit record. Basically, I'm going to put my intro music at the beginning. I'm going to hit record. I'm going to ask questions, and then I'm going to stop recording, and that's going to be the episode. But now I do a lot more with, like, I work in some background music here and there. If a
Mm,
if a guest goes on too long, in an answer, and the whole answer might be good, but they're just talking for 5 minutes straight, I will break that up, and I will go in later and insert some kind of narration to kind of
yeah, you
to
do.
break up the long monologue. And I wish I had known how to do all that stuff at the beginning. It doesn't matter. I mean, the show's just evolving, it's getting better, which it should. But yeah, I wish I had that skill from the beginning.
That's something I got to add in. Maybe I'll start at episode 100.
Yeah.
Adding in
There you
like
go.
either I mean editing for content too, like if it's an hour long, I usually keep it that way. I don't try to bring it down to 30 minutes, the most interesting 30 minutes, because then I feel like I'm biasing
Yeah.
in the
Well,
way that I'm displaying it. But okay, so now last question, which I already said, it was last one was the last one, but here's the real last question. What would you give a new up and coming podcaster for advice in 2 minutes or less?
I can do it in 30 seconds, I think. Um, there's lots of advice that I mean, there's a lot of different areas from marketing to, well, okay, I'll give two quick ones. All right. So maybe it will take longer than 30 seconds.
I said 2 minutes or less, so you're still good.
Okay. One would be listen to other podcasts. Um, a lot of podcasters, they get so into their own podcast that they don't, and I mean, go listen to the big dollar ones. So like
Hmm.
my benchmark is a podcast called Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell, and I listen to that, and I'll take notes. I'm not only listening for the entertainment content of it, the show,
Yeah,
but I'm listening like how they formatted it. That's where I got the ideas of like breaking it up with narration, putting in background music here and there. Like go listen to an NPR level podcast, or pick one that you really like that's a big budget podcast, take notes, and mimic it. You might not be able to achieve the quality that NPR is going to put out, but you can make your own podcast better. That would be one. The second piece of advice would be, in marketing, do not just promo blast social media. If that's all you ever do, you are never going to grow. If the only thing you post are
yep,
promos, you're never going to grow. You have to build your audience by building rapport and genuine, don't be fake, genuine relationships and friendships with an audience. Grow your social media presence, and then occasionally promo. And then when you've built those relationships and then you promo, people are more apt to go listen to your show.
absolutely. Also, I had the same thing where I used to just put blast to all my social media the exact same thing,
Yeah.
and I realized that it wasn't helping. And if you do that like one out of every seven, one out of every So 14 posts,
Yeah,
much better off.
you're
Well,
golden. Yeah, I do like
thank you
one
for
per
having
week.
me on this, Mark. I
Hey,
appreciate interviewing you instead of well, we both interviewed each other, but you get the
right.
point. I'm glad to hear, and I'll maybe have you on for my 100th so you can ask me some questions as well.
Awesome. Let's do it, buddy. Thanks,
You're the
Ben.
man.